much. So
Okay.
welcome, Alistair Whyte, Head of Plantlife Scotland. Alistair got a background in land management for nature conservation. And before Plantlife, he worked for a range of organisations, including the Wildlife Trusts, Nature Scot, Forestry and Land Scotland, and the RSPB. Over to you, Alistair.
Thank you, Julia, and thanks very much for inviting me today. It's fantastic to be here. So, yeah, I'm Alistair. I'm the head of Plantlife Scotland. So for those of you who don't know, Plantlife is a nature conservation charity that takes action for wild plants, both in the UK and internationally. What I'm going to do this morning is just give you a very brief update on what Plantlife has been doing in Scotland. And I'll look ahead, just to do a very brief look ahead to some of the things that we'll be focusing on over the next 10 years or so. So, Plantlife have just launched a new strategy. This is essentially, it's a statement really, I suppose. It's a statement of what we're going to be doing between now and 2030. It's big, it's bold, it's ambitious, I think. What it does is it really tries to set plant conservation at the heart of the twin crises that we're facing right now, which, as everybody knows, is the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. You know, this is the decade for action. It's the decade where we've all said we need to actually take action to try and halt these crises. It's the UN decade for ecosystem restoration. And if we collectively, if all of us collectively can't, before 2030, turn around this massive decline in biodiversity, which we're seeing in Scotland and across the planet, then I think nature conservation is going to become increasingly irrelevant. You know, it's as stark as that, really. We really do have 10 years or so to turn things around. So what Plantlife are trying to do with this strategy is to highlight that urgency, highlight the need for action, but hopefully to do that in a way that offers a positive vision of a greener and more plant-rich future. So we've said that our mission in the new strategy is to secure a world rich in plants and fungi. What we've done is we've broken that mission down into 4 themes. We're going to take direct action to protect and restore wild plant populations. We're going to connect people or reconnect people with nature, hopefully inspiring people to take their own actions. We'll work in partnerships to deliver the strategy. That's a hugely important one, and I'm definitely going to come back to talking about that one. And we'll collaborate and we'll influence across the globe to secure a better future for plants and fungi. So that's what we've said we'll do. And I've been kind of scratching my head thinking, okay, what does that actually mean in practice? What does that mean? What does that mean for Plantlife Scotland? What I'll do is I'll chat briefly in Scotland. Before I do that, this is us, this is the team, this is the Plantlife Scotland team. So when I say we, I actually mean these fantastic people here. So that's the Plantlife Scotland team there. I need to get a photo of Oliver, actually. He's not just the silhouette of a plant there. He's very difficult to take a photograph of because he's usually out in the wild somewhere. We're also supported by an amazing wider Plantlife team across the rest of the UK. So that's us, that's Plantlife Scotland. So the first theme of the strategy is to protect and restore the diversity of wild plants and fungi. And I thought I'd just pull out one of the projects that we're delivering under that theme at the moment, which is in the Cairngorms through our Cairngorms Rare Plants and Wild Connections project. So we're currently running this project in the Cairngorms, funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund with support from Nature Scot and the Cairngorms National Park. Essentially, we're delivering over those 5 topic areas that you can see on the left-hand side there. It's a really exciting project to be a part of. We're restoring wildflower meadows, and crucially, I think we're doing this in partnership not just with our volunteers, who we've been training up to monitor the wildflower meadows that we're restoring, but we're also doing it with farmers as well. So through the national park and through the nature-friendly farming network, the project team have been able to engage with a range of commercial farmers, and you can see them here in the photograph being trained along with our volunteers by Ben Averis in monitoring techniques. I think that's really important. Those links between nature conservation and farming on the ground are going to become increasingly more important. That's a really exciting part of the project. But reconnecting fragmented populations of twinflower and one-flowered wintergreen through a program of translocations, direct translocation on the ground. Habitat loss has meant that the remaining fragmented populations of these species don't have the genetic diversity to allow them to be resilient, and the patches are too far apart to allow reproduction. So we're able to do this work thanks to earlier work on twinflower translocations, really pioneering work by Andy Scobie, who's advised us on this project, and it's great to be able to take that forward, particularly with private landowners working not on conservation organisations' land, which is quite a nice aspect of the project. And through the project as well, we're involving citizen scientists, our volunteers, in a partnership project with the James Hutton Institute, which is enabling us to understand the fungal diversity on the summits of the mountains in the Cairngorms National Park. So this summer, our volunteers took soil samples from each of the 58 Munros in the national park. Really pleased to get all the Munros surveyed, and these are now being analysed by the Hutton Institute using eDNA technology. What's that's going to do is give us an understanding, for the first time really, of the fungal diversity on the summits of the mountains in the national park, and that'll tell us a huge amount about how the communities are responding to climate change, atmospheric pollution, and even things like grazing levels. So this is a really exciting part of the project as well. So why are we doing all this? On their own, these actions aren't enough to transform whole populations of species, but by advocating for species at the regional level, and particularly in places like the national park, which are high profile, we can demonstrate how action can be taken on the ground and hope that that can be replicated more widely, and we can integrate plant conservation into policies and plans. That's really what we're trying to do. A few years ago, Plantlife, along with BSBI and others, advised on targets for inclusion in the Cairngorms Nature Action Plan delivered by the National Park, and we're currently coordinating a response from the botanical community to the consultation on the new Cairngorms National Park Plan, which is going to be a hugely influential document. This is the cover of the Action Plan 2018 to 2023 here. I always say there's a reason why the capercaillie made it onto the cover of this document. It's because the RSPB have, for very good reason, been shouting loudly about capercaillie and capercaillie conservation for the last 20, 30 years or more. We've got to do the same for wild plants. We've got to make sure that plants receive the same focus and the same profile as other species within the park, and much more widely as well. So that's an example of a project that we're running at the moment. Plantlife has one nature reserve in Scotland, right up in the far north of the country. It's Munsery Peatlands in Caithness. It's nearly 2,000 hectares of blanket bog. It's part of the flow country. And we manage it for its peatland habitat and its rare species like marsh saxifrage and bog orchid. We've just revised the management plan for the nature reserve, which has been a big part of what I've been looking at this year. It's going well, the project, but we've got ongoing issues around non-native regen coming in from the surrounding conifer plantations, particularly Sitka spruce and lodgepole pine, and grazing and deer numbers, and we're having to constantly keep on top of the deer numbers on the reserve to ensure that the habitat, the peatland habitat, is in favourable condition. So that's the reserve. If you've never been there, I would definitely encourage you to go. You can find all the details for how to get there, how to visit the site on the Plantlife website. So jumping across to the West Coast, we've been busy there as well. Plantlifes Scotland are a lead partner in the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest. Scotland's temperate rainforests are one of our most important habitats, both nationally and globally, but they're in a terrible state ecologically. They're overrun with invasive species. They're suffering from massive impacts of overgrazing. So the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest is a collection of organisations which has come together to try to restore the rainforests. And we're doing that in a number of ways. We're fundraising for landscape scale projects in priority areas of the West Coast where we know we can make a difference. These projects have been taken forward by a range of partners, both NGOs and community groups. But the reality is that the scale of restoration that's needed to restore these rainforests properly is so big that it needs proper government support. We've estimated, we've said we need to save the rainforest. Okay, how much is that going to cost? We've estimated that the rainforest needs around about £500 million worth of investment over the next 10 years if we're to be successful in restoring it. That's predominantly to deliver invasive non-native species control and reduction in herbivore impacts. We're calling for £250 million of that to come from government, and we think that that could be used to lever to unlock another £250 million worth of private or charitable finance. Now, that sounds like a lot, but the Scottish Government have committed to spending £220 million over the next 10 years on peatland restoration. We think we can get the same for rainforest restoration. And don't forget that what we're asking for is a lot cheaper than the cost of the new Forth Bridge or the Edinburgh trams. So we've been taking our proposal to government, both to government itself, very high level within government, and to the parties themselves. We've held events at the SNP Party Conference and the Scottish Green Party Conference, which is where this photo was taken recently. We're hearing warm words. They're certainly speaking to us, the government, but we need to see that translated into action. Just as I was putting this presentation together, on Tuesday, the Scottish Government responded to the COP declaration on deforestation by putting out this press release, committing to work with us, work with the Alliance to save Scotland's rainforest. It feels like progress. It feels like we're moving in the right direction, but we still need cash. There's still no cash on the table ring-fenced specifically for rainforest restoration, so we're continuing with that. So the strategy sets out our ambitions around collaboration and influence, and I think that this report that we published last year is a good example of that aspiration. Nitrogen pollution often slips under the radar, but it's having a huge impact on wild plant populations, particularly on montane plant communities. Plantlife launched this report on the impact of nitrogen pollution on our flora and fungi, drawing together a whole load of evidence from academics, practitioners, species experts. Essentially, it was the product of a very intensive workshop which we held back in 2019 to come up with recommendations to the Scottish Government on how to tackle the impacts of nitrogen pollution. BSBI were part of the workshop. Jim was there all day. I think the report's strength comes from its partnership approach, and you can see the range of organisations that have endorsed the report, and we're taking forward now the report and trying to get the recommendations implemented. So our nitrogen report was a response to the Scottish Government's consultation on a review of its clean air strategy. Now, the policy world in Scotland, I think, is going to be very busy over the next few years for plant conservation, and this list here is just a few of the things that we're expecting are going to kind of bubble to the surface in terms of the politics and the policies, which offer massive opportunities and, in some cases, possibly, if they're not delivered correctly, significant threats for wild plant conservation. Now, I don't have time to talk through all of these, but if there's anything within that you see that looks interesting that you'd like to know more about, then pop a question in the chat or give it out later, and I'd be happy to explain a bit more. But just pulling out a couple of highlights. There's now a Scottish Government commitment to nature recovery targets. And my question is, what will they look like? Will they be meaningful? Is there a way of getting an appropriate plant-based metric or indicator into the targets. The second one, just to pull out, we are expecting, in fact, I think it has actually now today been released, an announcement from the Scottish Government on a new fund for nature. It's a significant step in the right direction. Previously, the Scottish Government have been awarding £2 million per year for nature conservation through their Biodiversity Challenge Fund. That's been increased just today to £13.5 million per year over the next 5 years. So that's a significant commitment that we're seeing thanks to the campaigning from a whole range of NGOs. It doesn't meet our rainforest ask that I was talking about earlier, but it does certainly help, and it's a significant step in the right direction. So the strategy sets out that we want to collaborate, we want to influence at scale to protect and restore habitats. One of the most important habitats is one that often gets overlooked in the rush to plant trees in particular. Species-rich grasslands are one of our most threatened habitats. Figures from Nature Scot suggest that if current trends continue, Scotland will lose all of its species-rich grasslands by the end of the century. Globally, grasslands are in a perilous state. So Plantlife has teamed up with the Bumblebee Conservation Trust and Butterfly Conservation to try to raise the profile of species-rich grasslands and secure their protection and restoration. So Grasslands Plus is the campaign that we've been running in the lead up to COP26. We want grasslands to be up there alongside peatlands and woodlands as part of the nature-based solution to climate change. We need a healthy integrated mix of habitats, including species-rich grassland. And we've taken that message directly to COP this week. We were here. This is our Conservation Director and our Scotland Comms and Policy Officer at COP. And we've been using this platform to make our case for wild plant conservation to decision makers both in the UK and internationally. We're there to seek international protection for species-rich grasslands, to work in partnership to fight the climate crisis, and to represent wild plants on the front line. Each day at COP has had a theme. Today is Nature Day, and that's a really appropriate day to be holding this conference. This is a global day for action for nature, and Plantlife are there at COP today, flying the flag for wild plants and joining hundreds of thousands of other people across the planet today on Nature Day, standing up for wildlife, standing up for nature. And everyone at this conference today is taking part in that as well, whether you know it or not. As Julia was referring to earlier, every single person who's ever made a plant record is taking part. Our arguments that we make are nothing without solid, verifiable data. And most of the evidence that we take to the Scottish Government or that we take to COP or any other platform has been gathered by volunteers through the National Plant Monitoring Scheme, the Threatened Plants Project, the BSBI database. All this remarkable, unparalleled evidence is what allows us to stand up with confidence in front of decision makers and governments with credibility. And that's why working in partnership is so important. That's why events like this are so important. And the main reason that I was so pleased that Jim asked me to come along today was that it gives me a chance to say thank you to everyone who's out there day in, day out, getting cold, getting wet, but making a massive difference. So the clock's ticking to 2030, but if we can work together, then I genuinely think that we can get there. And I'm looking forward to working with everybody here today to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair. That was really brilliant to have an update on all you're up to at Plantlife. Thank you.